Noah and David, hello. Thank you so much for your time. First of all, just set the scene for us. Tell us where in the kind of Alien universe, where in the timeline we're at for this particular show.
Yeah, I mean, we start a couple of years before they wake up on the Nostromo, before Ridley's film. So we're contemporaneous with the original film, and depending on how long the show runs, we might head toward the second film. But there's a lot of negative space in the Alien franchise because they're asleep for the majority of the years that go by as they move through the universe. So, yeah, we just placed it there. I think it's a good access point for an audience. They don't feel like they need to have watched every Alien movie before, because clearly we're not a sequel to any of them.
Or any Alien movie, really.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be too many references to other stuff people may have seen up until this point.
Well, I think for Alien fans, there's plenty of connection for them to see, and elements. It's hard to believe there's a human on the Earth who hasn't seen Alien. But no, it's not required. It's not like going to see a Marvel movie and going, wait, I didn't see that series, so now I have no idea who this person is.
What were your memories of seeing the original movie? Do you remember the first time you guys saw it?
The story I tell is I remember the first time I didn't see it, which was when I was 9 years old, and then we were invited, I was invited to another kid's birthday party to go see Alien, and my parents were like, that seems like a bad idea for a birthday party. So we went to a different movie instead. But I remember my first interaction with it obviously was the posters and that trailer, which is one of the greatest trailers of all time, I feel like, and so a bit like the Exorcist, which I did see too young. It creeps into the culture even if you haven't seen the movie. You're aware of it, and it's frightening just because it exists.
Yeah.
I never got past the marketing campaign. That I didn't need parents to tell me not to go. And ultimately, I didn't see it until I started working for Ridley. So I had awareness, as it was obviously ubiquitous in the culture, but I could at least know when to look away or have a sense of what I was in for.
No, you've had experience, obviously, in the past with shows like Fargo of kind of taking something that was a film and kind of adapting it. Tell us about the challenges in this particular project in turning Alien into sort of long-form storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you have to deal with is the fact that people live, right? Because so much of what an Alien movie is everybody dies except for one or two characters. And so if it's not a survival story, if it's a long-form story about, you need to build it as a drama, right? In this case, it's a drama about corporate power. It's a drama about, how do our children grow up, and the autonomy of the individual versus the money, which is very much a part of Ridley's film and James Cameron's film. So, all of those elements go into it, because even if we have 60% of the best action or horror, you still have 40% of what are we talking about? What's the show about, right? So, the first thing I did was take the creatures out of it. What's the show, right? And so, you have to build it as a drama, and then once you add the creatures in, I mean, Game of Thrones, for example, take the zombies and the dragons out of it, right? It's still a great meditation on power and the human drama. And then when you add those elements back in, now elevated genre is the best watching experience you can have.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because the Xenomorph, the alien itself is... I remember thinking before watching this, it's almost too powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do with your human characters in a space with that alien, like you say, if it's not just about survival,
Well, it's like a love story. When you put a love story in something, audiences can't really focus on anything else, right? Because it's such a compelling narrative. If you put a monster in something, people can't really focus on anything else. And so you have to calibrate it so that the monster plays to the themes of the show and the story, so that it's working for you and not against you as you're trying to tell this human drama.
And I think that story there have been elements of that story since Ridley's original, right? Particularly, like you've mentioned, kind of class, money, also this idea of the synthetics and what it means to be human, right? Tell us a little bit about the characters you introduced at the beginning, the character of Wendy and those kind of Lost Boys characters.
I mean, I had this idea that this moment on Earth in which the show arrives is a moment like turn of the century America, where we had Tesla and Westinghouse and Edison, right? This competition for who would control electricity. In our case, it's a competition for what is the future of humanity. Is it artificial intelligence? Is it neural implants and a sort of enhancements of our own bodies, or is it this transhumanism that people are envisioning, in which we can preserve our consciousness in a synthetic body? And whoever can really crack that is clearly going to earn $1 trillion and control the future. And so it's into that struggle that this ship crashes and these creatures arrive.
And I think what's also sort of the pull and the threat for humanity at the center, not just of whether or not the corporate powers and these sort of individual sort of titans, if they ultimately lead to humanity's destruction, but as the feature films are all survival stories, nobody's ever really pondered, well, what is a coexistence of humanity with this creature, much less some of the others he introduces. That notion is a bit hard to comprehend, and yet is something that is baked into this idea.
How afraid of AI are you guys in your everyday life right now? Do you use it? Do you embrace it? Are you wary of it?
Every time I use it, it lies to me.
Yeah.
So that seems weird.
Yeah.
I think the speed at which it's moving, it's a classic human flaw, right? Mostly it has to do with money, but it's like, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it, and yet everyone's racing forward because there's a dollar to be made and control of an industry to gain. So, we're all along for the ride. I don't know that I'm terrified of it yet. On some level, you realize that there just isn't enough power on the Earth to actually power the level of AI that people are envisioning. So I don't know. I know the Matrix turned us all into batteries, but I'm not currently worried about that.
I just think as a species, we have a very bad track record historically for being responsible either with the natural world in which we're meant to coexist, or now the technological world where we love to dive headlong into things we don't really understand, but we proceed unfettered.
Do you trust it, David? Do you use ChatGPT and that kind of thing day to day?
I don't use it day to day, but what I keep more of a wary eye on is trying to understand the world that my kids are venturing into. It's for up until the ChatGPT era, it was trying to find that balance between, well, let's keep you as a human individual who is interacting with other humans as much as possible, because that is how we mature and grow. But what does it do to a human's perception, a human's interactivity, and a human mind when suddenly they're existing predominantly more in a virtual world? Now you have the intrusion of AI, which is still created by humans, but which we have no comprehension of how it's learning itself. So it's a perversion upon a perversion, which makes me think and wonder about what education will look like over the next years to come, and that's where we really develop and mature and evolve. So it's kind of wonder how we will mutate, much less what it does to the ecology.
This is the first time really in the series that we've been on Earth, right, in the kind of alien universe. Tell me a little bit about designing the Earth in this world, right, and this idea, again, this kind of, is it far-fetched idea that 5 sort of tech trillionaires owned the world and carved it up, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only 100 years in the future, which, we still live surrounded by things from 100 years in the past. Yeah. So, it's a balance of our world plus, the enhancements of it. I just try to think a couple of steps ahead. It's clear that the planet is heating up. Doesn't seem like we're going to really do that much about it. So sea levels will rise. You have all the sort of heat and humidity level dangers of mold and funguses on everything. It's sort of even as the technology is growing, the natural world is rising to compete with it. And then, is it realistic to think billionaires will be trillionaires? Yeah, I can get it there mentally. And so, I think going and filming in Bangkok allowed me to have a skyline that most Westerners haven't really seen, so that, I don't have to spend, tons of money creating a CG skyline. We shot coastal Thailand as well. The world creation is it's a selection of reality and augmentation.
I mean, there's even a sort of a bizarre correlation to our media industry, where are we going to be 5? Will we end up being 4? It seems like we're in a constant sort of tension of consolidation. I think it is interesting that you created 5 creatures and 5 corporations. We'll see how many of those exist by the time we get to the end.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the creatures then. First of all, the Xenomorph. Did you say Xenomorph or Xenomorph, by the way?
I say Xenomorph.
Yeah. The Xenomorph itself, there are sort of elements of it that change and shift with each movie and each take on this universe. Are there any changes or sort of evolutions to the creature that you made for this story?
Yeah, on the micro level, if you look at it close up in places, I've done a different. I think it's least successful the more it looks like a suit performer, right? And so there are certain elements. I won't list them. I think it's fun for people to find those things out, but things that I did to just sort of make it maybe a little more bug-like and a little less humanoid, but always protecting the larger silhouette. I think that you get into trouble when you mess with what it looks like on the macro level. But it is both an honor to be able to play with that monster, and also, there's some trepidation about messing it up.
What is it about that design that makes it so utterly terrifying? Do you think there's something kind of uncanny about it, isn't there, about how it sort of almost looks like a believable animal, but not,
Yeah. Well, it's, just like the jump scare that comes in a horror movie is born in the first moment of dread of the opening credits. I think part of what makes the Xenomorph so frightening is every stage of evolution we've seen of it throughout the whole movie, right? And this idea that you are forced to host it, and then it bursts out of you, and then it becomes this enormous monster, and then when it opens its mouth, there's a second mouth on the inside. Everything about it is truly awful.
And it's rare, if you think about it, that you can witness a foreign entity like this, but the fact that every step of its existence is dramatized, it's like watching the most appalling nature documentary, and sometimes when you see where some of the insects come from and how they eat one another. I mean, it exists in nature, but this is it, on speed.
Yeah, it's the face hugger that really gets me. It's the scuttly nature of it, something about that creature. And there's obviously that kind of links to a lot of sort of body horror too. How far were you able to go in this? Being in the medium of television, I guess, if we want to call it that, streaming television, can you go all out with the horror, with the gore, with the body horror?
You can, but it's a question of calibration. It's for a general audience in a way, but also, so sometimes the suggestion of a thing is worse than the thing itself, and sometimes, especially with violence, if you show it, you actually push the audience away. If you hear it in the next room, if you know it's coming, and then you jump down the hall and you just hear an echo, you know what I mean? It might even have more impact than seeing it. If it's too gratuitous, and the moment people are covering their eyes, you've lost as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I'm always interested in this from talking to directors of horror, what the secret is to creating a sort of truly successful scare, I suppose, because people talk about it almost a bit like, a joke and a punchline,
Right.
what scares feel earned and what scares might feel cheap to audiences? Like, do you sort of know, like, do you have an instinct for what works in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, what the fascinating thing is that, as a filmmaker, I can make myself feel every emotion except fear from the work that I've created, right? Because I know what's going to happen. So, I can tell a love story and I can feel a swell of emotion when I watch it, so I can know as I'm watching it that this works. But when I build the suspense and it leads to the scare, I'm not scared at any point watching it, right? So the calibration of it actually has to come from the audience. I need to know is it, are we waiting too long, or is it not long enough? Sound design, there was a lot of work on the sound design of the show, because it's a science fiction story, it's a human drama, but it's also a horror movie, right? So horror classically is, your overall sound is low.
Yeah.
So people lean in, and then your scares are really loud. And so we had to strike that balance, right? Because our overall sound is not low. So you have to kind of strategically lower it before the scares come in.
But I loved how, in watching how Noah was working, not just in the editing of the visuals, but that he is looking to tap sort of every sensory sensitivity that we have as a species. And so the suggestion of something, not only as it might intrude your body, but even a sense of how something may taste or how it might smell, that he can give you sort of a sense that your imagination begins to take over. And ultimately it becomes how much tolerance you have for that. But he's provoking it on a lot of levels.
What kind of stuff scares you guys in cinema generally outside of the Alien universe? Do you have any movies that have particularly kind of terrified you in your life?
Yeah, I mean, supernatural horror, it tends to be what gets me the most. I had a very early Exorcist experience
Right.
that set the table for a lifetime of fear. I remember reading the Amityville Horror, at a young age as well. And so all those suggestions of haunting and the supernatural are what gets me. So a lot of James Wan's work, The Conjuring, et cetera.
And he's the master of a good jump scare, isn't he?
Yeah. And Hereditary was a great horror film. I love the creature horror as well, but it's a different, it hits you in a different place. The one thing that doesn't really do it for me is the kind of slasher murder horror that's not really entertainment to me,
Yeah. What about you?
I'm useless in this space. I really have no tolerance at all. I feel too trusting when I'm watching something, and yet that's what I think is so alluring about what Noah's done. Is I'm not one who's drawn to particularly the horror part of it, and yet he has found a way of making it so integral to the human story that we're telling. That you have to encounter it and you have to sort of perceive it and understand it and then wonder, what it might portend. In that kind of realm of storytelling, it's one I can give myself to because it's not there just to abuse or sicken me.
Yeah, totally get it. Yeah, and for a long time, horror, didn't seem to work on sort of long-form storytelling. When you think of most sort of horror shows of the 20th century, they might be more sort of anthology shows, sort of Twilight Zone, Tales of the Unexpected. And it really feels like only in the last sort of 10, 20 years and sort of American Horror Story and Walking Dead and all the shows of Mike Flanagan that we've really kind of nailed that format, I suppose. Like, what do you think is the challenge of sustaining horror, I suppose, across long-form storytelling in that way?
Well, it's that word sustain, right? On commercial television, you lose the atmosphere the moment you go to commercial, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
If you think about The Shining, that very opening music cue combined with that wide-angle helicopter footage, and you just feel like, I'm worried. There's a dread, and that dread is there the entire movie, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And the moment you go sell breakfast cereal, you've lost that mood. And then the moment you ask the audience, well, go off and have a week of your life and then come back. Again, you're releasing the tension, you're letting them out of it. So, part of the job of a show is you have to take those first few minutes to rebuild that sense for the audience.
I think Noah's absolutely right in terms of the sort of commercial history of television. But what's been interesting over the decades is you've had many genre no-go zones. Sci-fi was a genre no-go zone for a very long time, mostly because one couldn't really do it properly on television. But horror, I think, to this day is unique in the sense that, kind of like comedy, it means something different to everyone. And so it's a hard format to sell. I think most of what you see on television is always based on IP, so people could at least have some sense. But it really relies, as Noah's saying, so heavily on the individual who's rendering it, and the vision from that filmmaker makes the most difference for both a buyer to have confidence, much less an audience to have some sense of what experience they're in for.
Did you think of it kind of episodically, this will happen in episode 4, etc., or is it more, it was just an 8-hour movie, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's a serialized story. Within that, the 8 hours has to have a beginning, middle, and an end, but also every episode has to have a structural conceit to it and leave you someplace and launch you forward. So, for me, it tends to be, this is the episode where X happens.
Right, yeah.
But within that, you also have to understand that so much of what you're making is a cinematic experience, and at a certain point, you got to get the words out of the way and build those moments for the audience to fully immerse themselves cinematically.
But this is really a true weekly serial in the best way. That, hearkening back to Dickensian times, it's like you leave the audience, and it's so great to be on FX with this, that we'll get the 2-hour launch, but to be able to watch this with friends, with family, there's so much to ingest from each episode, so much to anticipate and expect from the next, that I think it would be shortchanging, though I know people love the binge, and there are people that I'm sure would ingest this all in one evening. I think the prolonged nature of this, especially given the way Noah has structured this story, I think will just lead to that much greater excitement and expectation of where it's going.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always been more of a fan of the kind of weekly storytelling and create that kind of water cooler moment almost from week to week, right? That feels kind of unusual these days, you know?
Well, and you get it here in spades. I mean, my kids are 14 and they love horror. And just from the premiere of the pilot, they're already infatuated with the Tick. They love that it has a name. And I can already anticipate, week to week what they're going to be going off to school to talk about with their friends as we get to witness what each of these creatures may bring and to ask the kind of questions you're asking, which is, that's what one does in a lot of the genre spaces is what do you identify with, what do you fear the most, and what do you think is going to happen as a result?
So let's talk about the creatures, because it's not just the alien that we're dealing with here, right? Tell us a little bit about kind of the way you've expanded this universe, I suppose.
Well, it was done out of necessity. If what the show is meant to do is to evoke all the feelings of watching Alien, well, the most critical feeling is wait, what is this creature? It's an egg, and then it's a face hugger, and then it falls off, and you think, oh, thank God that's over. And then you're having a nice lunch, and suddenly, you have this chest burst, and that's the worst thing you've ever seen. And then next it's going to grow to be 10 feet tall, and it's going to have 2 mouths,
It was
right?
always after lunch, though, wasn't it?
I know. And then, of course, James Cameron was like, well, who's laying those eggs?
Yeah.
And so, but after that, there were no revelations, and so the creature became a known entity, and then you watch it in a different way. You're like, oh, this is that moment, the face hugger's going to come out, etc. So in order to give you that discovery, the repulsive discovery process, I have to invent new creatures that you don't know how they breed or what they eat or how they move through the world or interact with your body, whether you're awake or asleep.
Where did those designs come from then? Tell me about creating those creatures.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of came out of the functionality of what I needed in the story, and then, it really is. You talked about comedy and horror, and I knew I was getting close to the right design when I just started to laugh because it was so awful to think, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
it's just so awful to not only to contemplate, but to show to an audience, to put in their heads, to go, well, they're never going to do that the same way again. Just like Jaws, you're never going to swim in the ocean again without that thought, or a pool, or a bathtub, or any body of water.
Yeah.
And so, from function came form, and a process with Weta of design, and I had in the writing of the scripts and the creating of the creatures some sort of visualization in mind, and then it was a question of really drilling down. And it's amazing how long a process it is to actually create something that feels iconic.
I think it's neat though that Noah elected to play with creatures and design creatures that we have some point of reference ourselves for. I mean,
Right.
even with the, well, we've met the image. Even with the image, there's an octopus-like almost cuteness about it, and yet
Is this the little eye thing?
Yes,
Scuffle?
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like, the Tick and some of the others you see, it's like there's a degree of recognition which in some ways makes it all the more dangerous because you think you might know, but you really don't.
Yeah. The Tick, by that you mean the thing
Yes.
that crawls into the
Yes.
ice suits.
Yes,
Yeah.
because
Oh my
there
God.
it's like, okay, well we've seen some formulation of that,
Yeah.
perhaps in a film before, and then suddenly it blows itself up,
Yes.
to an extraordinary degree that just makes it all the more gross and all the more funny, if you can get there.
I love it. How much of it was practical versus visual in terms of creating the alien and the other creatures?
Well, I mean, a lot of the Xenomorph world is practical. The eggs are physical objects. The face huggers are physical objects. And we had multiple. We had ones that were animatronic. We had ones that were just rubber. We had ones to wear on the face that you could breathe through. We had ones where the sacs inflated, etc. And then the Xenomorph was a suit performer, and you've got Weta folks operating the tail on a fishing line and all of that. The other creatures, because they were newer designs and because of the production schedule, we had physical objects as kind of props and references for lighting and for the actors to see what they were working against, but those ultimately are created in post.
I think it's a great legacy of the original film that Noah was able to seize on that creature as one that our actors could encounter and that our audience is accustomed to seeing in that form. Because I look at wonder how my kids are encountering Superman's dog. It's like, okay, it behaves like a dog, but it's a virtual dog. You know it's a virtual dog, and you don't have the same reaction to it emotionally or otherwise.
So finally then, what happens beyond this? Have you got ideas for this potentially going on beyond one season?
I do. I mean, I think that I have a destination in mind story-wise, which allows me to know what the story is I'm telling, what it means, and I don't know how long it takes to get there, but I do have a sense of where we go in success, and the question becomes, how streamlined can we make the process so that you're not waiting for 3 or 4 or 5 years for more.
And the other question will be whether Noah gets ahead of what's going on Earth, or if Earth gets ahead of what's going on in Noah's head.
Yeah, exactly. See if we all survive.
Slow down, guys.
That's right.